Welcome to the Humanities Team podcast with me, Steve Farrell. Humanities Team is an international spiritual movement whose purpose is to communicate and demonstrate the timeless truth that we are all one, with the divine and all life, caring for each other and the world we share, so that people's actions reflect this profound understanding within our generation. We believe that living this truth is essential to resolving the most chronic and acute world challenges and vital to creating a flourishing world of peace, harmony, and happiness. We offer transformative education programs in personal and spiritual development, and we host an annual event called Global Oneness Day. Similar to Earth Day, which galvanized the global environmental movement, Global Oneness Day has become a catalyst for spiritual activism and an integral part of the present-day global oneness movement, which represents a profound new paradigm in human culture. Humanities Team is the only global nonprofit organization working in transformational education. Since we are a nonprofit, there is no focus on growing profits or satisfying shareholders, and 100% of all revenue goes toward our work supporting conscious evolution, planetary awakening, and flourishing at every level of life. If you'd like to learn more about us or want to support our mission directly through donation or volunteering some of your time, please visit us online at humanitiesteam.org. And lastly, if you enjoyed this podcast, we'd be grateful if you'd leave us a review. Welcome, everyone. I'm Steve Farrell, the Worldwide Executive Director of Humanities Team. Welcome to this Sacred Action panel with Neale Donald Walsch, Marianne Williamson, Andrew Harvey, and Rabbi Michael Lerner. Sacred Action is the coming together of spirituality and activism. It's not about religion. It's not about any form of dogma. It is activism that comes from the heart, not just the head. Activism that is compassionate, positive, kind, and transformative. Sacred activism fuses inner transformation and outer transformation. Being a spiritual activist means doing our part in creating change with a spirit of positivity, compassion, love, and a balance of interdependence and self-determination. Nothing is more inspiring and more rewarding than being the change we want to see in the world. This panel models this in an exceptional way. I'm going to introduce you to the panel now. I'll introduce panel members one at a time, and then we'll go right to questions and panel discussion. Neale Donald Walsch is the founder of Humanities Team and a modern-day spiritual messenger whose words continue to touch the world in profound ways. Neale searched for spiritual meaning before experiencing his now famous Conversations with God book series. In the middle of the night, in August 2016, Neale found himself drawn into a new and totally unexpected dialogue with God, in which that dialogue emerged, Conversations with God, Book 4, Awaken the Species. Welcome, Neale, to Global Oneness Day.
Thank you, Steve. It's lovely to be here.
And Marianne Williamson is an internationally acclaimed spiritual author and lecturer. Her mega bestseller, A Return to Love, is considered a must-read of the new spirituality. In Marianne's new book, Tears to Triumph, The Spiritual Journey from Suffering to Enlightenment, the internationally recognized teacher tells us that our desire to avoid pain is actually detrimental to our lives, disconnecting us from our deepest emotions and preventing true healing and spiritual transcendence. Welcome to Global Oneness Day, Marianne.
Thank you.
Andrew Harvey is the founder and director of the Institute of Sacred Activism. Sacred activism is a transforming force of compassion and action that is born of a fusion of deep spiritual knowledge, courage, love, and passion with wise, radical action in the world. The large-scale practice of sacred activism can become an essential force for preserving and healing the planet and its inhabitants. Among Harvey's well-known books are Dialogues with a Modern Mystic, Hidden Journey, The Essential Mystics, Son of Man, The Return of the Mother, and The Direct Path. And welcome to Global Oneness Day, Andrew.
Thank you so much.
Rabbi Michael Lerner, author of a national bestseller, The Left Hand of God, Taking Our Country Back from the Religious Right, is not only rabbi of Bet Tikkun, but is also the editor of Tikkun. Tikkun is one of the most respected intellectual, cultural magazines in the Jewish world, but also one of the most controversial because of its stand in favor of the rights of Palestinians, which locates Lerner in the minds of many as the leader and most prominent spokesperson in the U.S. of Jewish supporters of the Israeli peace movement. Welcome, Rabbi Lerner. All right, and Rabbi Lerner, you're on mute there. Great to have you with us.
Glad to be with you.
And thanks again for being here. Marianne, Neale, Andrew, and Rabbi Lerner, it's a privilege and a pleasure to be with you all. This is an amazing panel. We've all really been looking forward to the gathering of this panel. We only have an hour, so let's go ahead and get started. And Neale, if it's okay, I'm going to start with you. With the release of your new book, Conversations with God, Book 4, Awaken the Species, there are two questions you ask God, among others. One, is the human race being offered help by highly evolved beings from another dimension? And two, is there a key role that humans are being invited to play in advancing their own evolution by joining in a mutual mission to assist the planet during these critical times ahead? Can you just tell us in a little more detail God's answers to these important questions?
Well, the answers that I received, I don't like to call them God's answers so definitively, but the God of my understanding. I believe, by the way, let's be clear here, that every single human being on the face of the earth has direct access to divine wisdom that resides within all of us. So I resist with everything at my might any suggestion or idea or wording that would put me in a different category from anybody else on the planet. But what I have been inspired by the divine wisdom that I believe all of us access to know is this. It seems to me now incontrovertible that there is intelligent life existing elsewhere in the cosmos. Yeah. That the Earth is the only place in the entire cosmos where intelligent life exists probably hasn't looked at the situation very closely. We are now told by cosmologists that there, in fact, even our universe is a universe, a part of a universe of universes. That is, we are told that the ultimate reality is 100 times larger than we ever thought it was. With that as a backdrop, I have become clear that there are other beings who exist in our cosmos, and I believe we are being assisted and helped, yes, directly and specifically as we move through the evolutionary process of our own species. And I think that we are now being invited at this point in time, at this very critical point in time, we are invited to do something quite extraordinary on this planet. Human beings are invited to self-select, that is, to choose themselves to be exemplars, to offer a new way for us to move through our evolutionary process much more rapidly. In the past, evolution required adaptation largely, and that took place over thousands, if not millions of years. We are being invited now to replace adaptation with imitation. That is, to rise up and show each human being whose lives we touch what it means to be a new human, what it means to live by a new set of standards, by a new idea of who we are, why we are, where we are, and what all of life is really about. And for me, it breaks down to one simple statement. I hate to be predictable and perhaps even hackneyed and trite, but the answer is simple. We are all one, and if we began to act as if there was only one of us and that we all belong to not just the same species, but the same experience that we call life itself, and if we performed in that way in our lives, everything could change on the planet overnight, not the least of which is what's going on right now between Korea and the United States. So I just want to suggest that the message we are being given is an opportunity, and the invitation that we are being offered is an opportunity for each of us to stand as a model for what it means to move through the world with compassion, with understanding, with love, with caring, with forgiveness, and all the aspects of divinity that each one of us, regardless of our spiritual background, ascribes to that higher power that, by the way, the largest number of human beings on the planet seem to feel does exist. There doesn't seem to be much controversy among the largest number of people on the earth that there is some higher power, by whatever name you want to give it, that is behind all of this. And I want to suggest that if we simply step up to our part of that higher power and express that part through us, in us, and as us, we can change the world overnight. And speaking of people who change the world overnight, Marianne Williamson, Michael Lerner, and Andrew Harvey are among people who are doing that every day of their lives. If only I could be like even one of them for a half hour and be happy with how I've experienced my life on this planet. Thank you, Steve.
True statement. Thank you, Neale. That was profound. This whole hour is going to be profound. Thank you. What a great way to get started. And Marianne, I'm going to come to you next here in Tears to Triumph. You say that we as a culture and as individuals have learned to avoid facing pain. And by doing so, we're neglecting the spiritual work of healing. Can you give us examples of how we as a culture avoid pain and how we can correct this? And as well, here, as you all respond, feel free to, there's incredible, there's profound wisdom being shared. And if you want to just say anything into the panel in addition to responding to that question, please feel free to.
Over the last few years, we've really taken to throwing a cheap yellow smiley face over everything. Be happy, be happy, be happy. We see this reflected, among other things, in this really epidemic of overprescription of antidepressants, which is particularly disturbing because this is not a time on the planet for any of us to be desensitizing ourselves to our own pain. There's a reason we have physical pain, and there's a reason we have psychic pain. It's a message from the brain to go in a different direction. If you have a broken leg, you feel physical pain. You can't just take morphine. You have to reset the bone. And the psychic pain that so many people feel in the world today, there's a reason for this. It has to do with the deep suffering of so many people, not just ourselves, which all of us are experiencing at least subconsciously. So desensitizing ourselves to our own pain makes it more probable that we're vulnerable to forces that would profit off our being desensitized to the pain of others. I think the invasion of Iraq, which was certainly is universally acknowledged on both left and right now, to have been at the very least a grave mistake. And that's even without any of the moral implications of what it means to invade a country that did nothing to you. But at the very least, we see it as a grave mistake. And it really makes you think, where were the American people that we so relatively easily acquiesced to that? And where we were was out to lunch in terms of really registering what it would mean for all those bombs to fall down from the sky on all these men, all these women, on all these children who had certainly done nothing to us. You know, I am impacted as I listened to Neale, and as I consider who is on this call. All the speakers on this call are dear friends of mine, dear colleagues of mine, and I think something has marinated over the last few years. We've all known each other for a long time. We've known each other for decades now. We have other colleagues that are like us, join in this larger, more holistic, integrative conversation that includes not just the issues of personal change and transformation, right, but also collective change and transformation. And I don't think, and I'm sure all of you on the call would agree with me, never has there been a time. And of course, the irony is that President Trump has created both the necessity, both the urgency of a new conversation, but also the possibility of a new conversation in terms of its being seriously heard by the mainstream in a way that has not existed before. And I'm just so glad that we have all been at this for so many years, that we got the message. We already articulate it. We already have grounded it. And I think there's something really profound going on here, that so many of us are already in the conversation that needs to happen, and are ready. And I think we'll be appointed, just like Neale was talking to, you know, all of us are guided by our own voice for God, however we articulate it. And I think this next phase is going to have to do with we've always worked together, but, you know, we're separate. We're doing different projects, but, you know, we see each other when we see each other. We love each other. We all know we're part of the facets of the same conversation. But I think now we're moving into a new chapter where our collaboration, both seen and unseen, will be, first of all, will be impactful in a way it has never been before, and also recognized in a way it has never been before.
Yeah, thank you, Marianne. Beautiful. So I'm going to just come over to you here next, Andrew. And again, just you can speak into the panel beyond the question here. But in your book, The Hope, you offer the reader not only a guide to discovering their divine purpose, but also a blueprint for a better world. Can you explain this in more detail for us?
Thank you for inviting that. In my book, The Hope, I really try to lay out a map for what I call sacred activism. I believe that our last and best hope at this tragic but amazing moment of our evolution is a worldwide resistance movement fueled by divine love and directed to transforming the structures that keep tragic injustice alive in our world. I try to offer the various kinds of service, the various kinds of practice, the various modalities of nonviolent resistance that I believe are absolutely essential to our survival. I think we're at an extremely dangerous moment. It's more dangerous than words can describe. In fact, I believe that if we don't rise in significant numbers, infused by divine love and divine peace, to say a resounding no to all of the things that are now being done, and to say a resounding yes to a wholly new vision of how we can live together, the human race faces extinction. And in its extinction will take a great deal of nature with it. So I'm very, very anxious at this moment, but also tremendously heartened by the enormous resistance that, as Marianne so shrewdly points out, is being awakened by this current crazy presidency. So what we all need to do now, it seems to me, is to take very seriously the moment that we are in, to realize that there is still tremendous help from the divine, perhaps more than any other time, to realize, as Donald says, that beings all over the universe are looking to us and trying to help us, and to be encouraged by that, to go very much deeper into internal spiritual discovery so as to discover the great strengths that live inside us, and then really be much braver and more courageous than any of us have been up to this moment, and really stand up for justice and compassion in a world in which those values are being threatened. If we can do that, and I believe we can do that, and I believe everybody in this panel knows the depth of the situation and the possibility that it makes vivid. If we can do that, there is a chance that we can birth a wholly new way of being and doing everything. But we cannot afford to wait. We've got to go forward now on every level with great hope, great trust, great practice, and great cooperation.
Yeah, beautiful. Boy, well, this is the Sacred Action panel, isn't it? And we're pointed real straight here. Thank you, Andrew. Rabbi Lerner, I'm going to come over to you here. Your magazine, Tikkun, gives people the opportunity to rethink religion, about religion that is deeply spiritual and not dogmatic, that builds empathic communities and inspires people to activism to create a caring, egalitarian, and environmentally sane society. Can you share with us what ways that Tikkun is achieving these results?
Well, Tikkun is the Hebrew word. It means to heal, repair, and transform the world. And I want to first of all say amen to the last three speakers, all of my brothers and sisters, because beautiful what you say and who you are. And so it's an honor to be with the three of you, and Steve, thank you so much. So Tikkun Magazine, you can also get it at tikkun.org, has created an organization called the Network of Spiritual Progressives. We're creating chapters around the country, and we have some very specific ideas about how to answer the question that I think is probably arising in people's minds as they shake their heads and say amen to Marianne and to Andrew and to Neale, to say, and what should I do? What concretely can I do? So I want to say there are a few things. Number one, we need to advocate specifically as a way to move the conversation forward for a new bottom line in our society, in which every institution, every social practice, every corporation, every government policy, every legislation, our judicial system, our educational system, our corporations, all should be judged efficient, rational, or productive to the extent that they maximize love, caring, kindness, and generosity, environmental sensitivity, enhance our capacity to see other human beings as embodiments of the sacred, and enhance our capacity to respond to the universe with awe and wonder and radical amazement at the grandeur of all that is. That little 20-second new bottom line is meant to oppose the current bottom line that every institution uses now to judge whether it's efficient, rational, or productive, namely the bottom line of money and power. We have to articulate this, and we have to go into every social change organization, including and the Democratic Party and the Greens and whatever political organizations there are, and tell them that it's not enough to talk about this particular little change or that particular change. We need a total transformation of consciousness, and the transformation of consciousness starts in the ways that the other three speakers have said, all of those beautiful things, recognizing our oneness and so forth, but concretely, a new bottom line. Now, and by the way, the Network of Spiritual Progressives is now organizing trainings for people to be spiritual activists in this historical moment. So you can get to there at spiritualprogressives.org/training. Okay. So yeah, I'm for moving forward in very particular ways. The second thing I want to say is the liberal and progressive forces in this society and the spiritual progressive forces in this society have not yet been able to speak to a very significant section of the population. And in the empirical work that I did as a psychotherapist and as the primary investigator of an NIMH study of the psychodynamics of American society, I learned that many people are moving to the right, not because they agree with the right's policies, but because they feel contempt coming to them from liberals and progressives who often demean them, who often say that if anybody who's not on our side is a racist, a sexist, a homophobe, a xenophobe, an anti-Semite, an Islamophobe, and it's not true. There are a lot of very decent people who have not yet come to us. We need to change the culture in the liberal, progressive, and even spiritual world in such a way as to overcome our elitism that conveys the sense to people that we think we are on so much of a higher level than they are, and that we want their votes or we want them to participate in our demonstrations and our resistance activity. But we basically think that if they're religious or spiritual, they must be deluded, because there's a great deal of religiophobia in the liberal and progressive world. We also need to convey to them that we don't think that they are evil people or that automatically they have the consciousness of Donald Trump. No, lots of people have moved there just because they feel that, Hillary Clinton summed it up by saying you're a bundle of unfortunates. I've forgotten the exact word now. But,
a basket of deplorables.
Yeah, a big basket of deplorables, right? That's a terrible message to be conveying to the people. So we need, as spiritual activists, to go into, for example, the Democratic Party and the Green Party and every other social change movement, and try to help them overcome their elitism and recognize the humanity and decency of people who don't agree with us on a lot of other issues. Step number one, if we want to change anybody else, to move them in a direction of environmental sanity, against nuclear war, against a lot of the other crazy things that are happening in the Trump administration, we have to speak to their hearts. And the way to speak to that heart is to first and foremost speak with empathy and caring and let's respect to other human beings.
It's a shame that you are not more articulate.
I'm sorry about that. What can I do?
I'm just going to make this sign because I could for 5 minutes thank each of you after very profound responses, but I'll just do this in the interest of time. But really very powerful. And again, wow, this is a sacred action panel. And is it pointed north and strongly or what? So Neale, I'm going to come over to you again here. This is regarding Awaken the Species. And are there things that you might want to share about the 16 specific examples of highly evolved beings and how they do things or can do things differently than most humans?
I want to, it's just so predictable. I'm sorry I'm being so predictable, but I want to just say ditto. God help me, Rush Limbaugh. Oh my God. But I wanted to say ditto to everything that Marianne and Andrew and Michael have just said. I mean, they've said it so beautifully. There's nothing more really to say than to please listen carefully to what these three extraordinary human beings are sharing with us, and do what you can to move that whole process that they're describing forward, the process of reconciliation, the process of sacred spiritual activism, and all that they're talking about. The book Awaken the Species offers us a list of specific behaviors that highly evolved beings seem to be demonstrating in their daily experience, that human beings who are living in an unawakened state, often without knowing it, sleepwalking as it were, are not demonstrating. I don't want to give you, I'm not going to go through a list of 16 of them, but I can give you 2 or 3. One of them is, and the very first one on that list that I was given in the dialogue, is in fact, I'm sorry to be so hackneyed and predictable, but is in fact to notice that highly evolved beings see and live into the oneness of all of life. They don't deny the unity of everything, but they not only see it, they not only acknowledge it, they live into it, and they allow their lives to be a representation of it. Another thing that highly evolved beings do is they see what is so and they do what works. Human beings who are living in an unawakened state, that is those who are, not everyone is, but those who are living in an unawakened state, often see what is so and do what does not work. I'll give you just one simple example of what that looks like. We see that what is so is that putting children at a very impressionable age, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 years old, in front of video games, television programs, cartoons even, and taking them to motion pictures where violence is all that they see. We even give them toys. There was Christmas shopping last Christmas, and looking at guns, machine guns that act and sound like actual weapons, and go outside in the backyard and play. So we give them these visions and these understandings of how human beings resolve their conflicts. Then when they turn 13, 14, 18, and 20, and they act out those behaviors, we slap our foreheads. Oh my gosh, where did they ever get such an idea? It's very simple. We see what is so. We see what is so about this, smoking. We see what is so about eating incredible stuff that we call food these days. We see what is so, but we do not do what works. We see what is so, and we do, in fact, often exactly the opposite. So one of the behaviors of highly evolved beings is that they are very clear what is true, and they act in accordance with what their truth tells them. And a third thing I would mention, then I'll stop with my list, but a third thing is that highly evolved beings, in fact, tell the truth all the time about everything to everyone. That is, without exception. And human beings, of course, we know, lie to each other and often to themselves. Those are just 3 of a whole list of 16 behaviors that if we are alive and awake and aware, we could adopt and embrace. And I offered those behaviors in the book. They were given to me through that inspirational voice that I call God. But those behaviors were brought to me to place before humanity a blueprint, a way we could get from where we are to where we want to be. And if we simply adopt those behaviors one by one, we probably could get much closer to where we say we want to be. In addition to reading everything that Marianne Williamson has ever written in her entire life, every single word that Andrew Harvey has placed on paper, God bless him, and all of the speeches and talks and the information we've gotten from Michael Lerner, ladies and gentlemen, grab the wisdom from these people, and your life can change virtually overnight.
Yeah, man, and Global Oneness Day this is a call to action day, right? And we call it our Earth Day for an awakened humanity. And this is not about us all just sitting here and enjoying viewing 12 plus hours of programming at all. It's not about that. It's about what you all are bringing in, these calls to action. Hey, look at what's happening in the world. We've got to all come down on the field. There's no space to be sitting up in the stands anymore. It's about us self-selecting, going down on the field. And each of the speakers here is extending invitations to be involved in this or that or some other thing. And just a shout out to everybody to become involved in one thing, at least one thing, with the inner transformation and the outer transformation component. Because as you all share, when it's just one, if it's just outer, then we're just making a bunch of noise. And if it's just inner, we can sit in a cave. But when
Can I say something here, Steve? I'd love just to pop in here.
Yeah, sure, please.
Everywhere I go over the world, people ask me, what am I called to do? What's my mission? Because there are millions of people waking up to the dreadful situation we're in, but nearly everyone is enormously confused as to what to do. The first thing I say to them is, you're not called to be Errol Flynn in one of Errol Flynn's films and rescue Burma single-handed. You cannot save everything and you cannot serve everything. And then I invite them to do a practice, to get up in the early morning, to surround themselves with the presence and protection and radiance of whatever they call God, and then to ask themselves one question. What of all the causes out there breaks my heart the most? Because I've discovered in myself, and by talking to thousands of sacred activists all over the world, that when you discover something that is almost unbearable for you to think about, that's the cause that you will find the energy and the passion to serve, because that cause causes you so much suffering that you cannot not act once you've identified that radical heartbreak. So I so love Marianne as a person, and I so love the work that she does. And one of the most important books she's written is Tears to Triumph, because she's showing us and helping us to see that the pain we feel isn't something we need to medicate. It's something we need to hold sacred, because it contains the secret of what we are being summoned to do. So if you're listening to this and want to find out what your mission is, ask that question and ask it again and again until you discover what you are most heartbroken about, and then make a resolve to do something about it. And then realize another thing, that you're not going to be effective if you're working just on your own. We're not being summoned just to work on our own in Clint Eastwood individualistic ways. I've set up a program of what I call networks of grace, creations of cells between 6 to 15 people who come together to love each other, encourage each other, pray together, and pool their resources to start being radioactively mischievous in their communities to really do something. So there are 2 concrete suggestions for you. Ask what breaks your heart, make a pledge to do something about it, and then collectively of ragged lovers of God and humanity around you in a network of grace, encourage each other, sustain each other, and come together to enact real change in your local communities in the service of this global birth that is struggling to be born out of this madness and this chaos.
Thank you, Andrew. Perfect to walk that in right now here. Thank you. And Marianne, I'm going to come over to you here next. This in your book, Tears to Triumph. Again, I'm coming back to that book. It inquires about the spiritual responses to suffering of Buddha, Moses, Jesus. It speaks about the source of our sadness and how to transcend it. Can you give us insight into that process?
I can, but I would prefer to go back to some things that have already been said and piggyback on the conversation that's already begun with Neale and Andrew, if I may.
Yes, please. With any of your...
Thank you. In the human body, every cell is guided by a natural intelligence to not only become what it is to become, but then to collaborate with other cells. And then together they serve the healthy function of the organ or the organism and the organism of which they are part. Now, every once in a while, a cell goes insane and loses its contact with its own natural intelligence. That is cancer. We call it a malignancy. It is a malignancy in the body, and it is a malignancy in consciousness. It's when a cell, instead of seeing as its mission that it collaborate with other cells to serve the healthy functioning of the organ and organism of which it's part, instead decides to go off and do its own thing. And that is the malignancy that not only destroys the body, but it also destroys the entire human race when this infection occurs within our consciousness. And that is the malignancy of human consciousness at this point. Everybody thinking it's just about me, which takes the form, as Michael was saying, of a bottom line of greed and selfishness, expressed by monetary gain usually, as opposed to love and brotherhood and justice. Now, when we recognize this, that this is, as Gandhi said, the human race having gone insane, then the issue is how do we heal? in both Judaism and in Christianity, there is an expression, the small, still voice for God. Neale talks about, we all talk about it in our own way. But the idea here is that each of us does have a voice for God, which is parallel to the natural intelligence in every cell. We are the cells of human civilization, and we are imbued with a guidance system. In the Course in Miracles, for instance, it says every morning you're to wake up and say, where would you have me go? What would you have me do? What would you have me say? And to whom? Neale has been guided to write his books and start his organizations. Andrew has been guided to write his books, start his organizations. Michael has been guided to write his books and start his own organizations. All of us are guided, and I think that for me is an important message for everyone to know at this time, that just as you are, the cells in your body know what to do, you at your deepest know what to do. The point is we are not schooled in listening because we are all trained into a thought system that leads us away from our own natural guidance. And when we wake up in the morning and we go directly for the computer and the newspaper and all of the things in the world which lead us to just download fear, I think many people realize that prayer and meditation this is it. Prayer and meditation is the way we open the inner ear so that we can not only go through the personal alchemy of becoming who we need to be, but also hear the guidance as to what we are supposed to do. Without the prayer and meditation, we not only don't know what to do, but even perhaps, well, certainly equally important, we're not informed and transformed enough to be the people who can do what it is we are then guided to do. So I think that issue of keeping it very simple, prayer, meditation, really asking, how can I serve? Whether it's what makes my heart break or how can I serve? I think each of us has a highly individualized curriculum, just like one cell in the body, you, the lungs, you, the heart, you, the pancreas, you, the bones. Every cell in society, you, the arts, you, science, you, teaching. And politics at this point is a collective assignment. And I think when we support each other in knowing that, and sometimes people can't figure it out, sometimes the best question we can ask, well, did you meditate today? Did you pray about it? Did you ask God, the God of your understanding, how you can be of service? And I think so many of us then will start listening to, that in what the East is called your dharma, your bliss. If you have passion, like when Andrew was talking about what makes your heart break, if you have passion about the environment, that's your assignment. If you have passion about sex trafficking, that's your assignment. And I think all of us need to support each other in knowing that the 2018 congressional elections is everybody's assignment.
Absolutely.
I talk in terms of that cellular intelligence that you've mentioned, Marianne. Conversations with God gave that the label that I received was that's our DNA, divine natural awareness.
Mm.
Yeah.
And like you said, everybody has it.
That we do. We're all emanations of the divine, which is what Global Oneness Day. That's one of the Oneness Day. I'm going to leave now these specific questions because we've really got this conversation started. Rabbi Michael Lerner, just come over to you. I know there probably are 1,000 things you want to bring in at this point. So.
Yes, what I wanted to mention that I think almost certainly everybody who is listening to this conversation already has a great deal of their spiritual life awareness in them, and wants to do something to change this world, to heal it, to repair it, and so I want to, of course, totally agree with what Marianne just said and with what Neale and Andrew have been saying, and I want to say that there's a big obstacle, and the obstacle is the tremendous sense of despair that has happened in this country. That is growing more and more and more as one crazy thing after another comes to us from Washington, D.C. One crazy decision, one crazy policy after another. And at first it seemed like, well, we can resist this one, or we can resist that one. But they're coming at so many different fronts that it is not unreasonable for people to feel somewhat overwhelmed by it all. And hence, to feel somewhat despair and some depression. And that depression, by the way, I believe is universal because it's experienced not just by the people of the United States, but by anybody who's watching what's going on here, and by the planet itself, which has been suffering more and more and more, because it's not just human beings who are suffering. Our planet Earth is suffering from the way that we have been treating it, and it's getting worse. And the policies that are coming down, eliminating previous decisions to try to protect the planet, are making its depression worse. So we're in a situation in which we've got a complex set of forces that are working on all of us to not go forward with what we actually know needs to happen. Then feel like, well, what's the point? So one of the things that we say at the Network of Spiritual Progressives and in Tikkun Magazine is, don't be realistic. Don't listen to the voices around you that are telling you that the kinds of changes that are needed are so overwhelming that you'll never accomplish them. And I know that this is going to be aired at a time close to the Hanukkah and Christmas. Both of those are holidays that affirm the need to continue to hope and not be realistic, to see the possibility of transformation that happens with the birth of a young, pure child in the Jesus child, to see in the Hanukkah candles the story of a people that rebelled against overwhelming odds and in a guerrilla struggle managed to win. To not let ourselves be inspired by the teachings of our traditions, to know that although it looks impossible, you never know what is really possible until you spend your lifetime fighting for what is desirable. Because things that always looked impossible, for example, the struggle against racism, the struggle against sexism, the ability of gays and lesbians to marry, all of these things looked impossible when they were first articulated. People said to the women's movement, "You're going to overcome 10,000 years of patriarchy." Well, of course, no, they haven't yet done that, but they've done an awful lot more. I believe the women's movement is one of the great historical miracles of this period that will be looked back upon thousands of years from now as a great turning point in human history. So don't be realistic. Go for your highest vision of the good. And if you want to know where to find other like-minded people, any of the people on this panel's writings are terrific. Read them and join the Network of Spiritual Progressives, spiritualprogressives.org. Come to our training, read Tikkun Magazine, tikkun.org. We need to go forward together, even in the face of despair, even in the face of depression, to nevertheless believe in the possibility of possibility.
It was Einstein who said that if it's not impossible, it's not worth attempting.
And I think also, it's not just that you never know what's possible. For those of us who are representing the Word of God in any way, the whole point of our being here is to remind people that in God all things are possible. Absolutely. The message of Hanukkah is that they made it to the promised land. The message of the story of Jesus is that he did resurrect. And behind every great social justice movement in the United States has been a religious and spiritual community. Abolition derived from the Quakers. Many of the leaders of the women's suffrage movement were Quakers. The head of the civil rights movement was a Baptist preacher, because the religious or spiritual perspective gives you two powers that no powers of the world have. And that's number one, conviction to say no to that which you find intolerable. There's so much moral relativism in the world today, but for those from a spiritual perspective, we are not afraid to call evil evil. If you have, when Michael was talking about the Democratic Party, for instance, if the only opposition that you can wage against mass incarceration is, well, guys, we'd actually spend less money to educate these kids than we spend to incarcerate them. That is you're allowing the corruption of a financialized perspective to imbue your argument. The argument against mass incarceration should be, it is evil. And not only does the spiritual perspective give people like the Quakers, if the inner light makes each man, woman, and child equal, then to them, then slavery was intolerable. It's the difference between being anti-slavery and abolitionist, is that anti-slavery just says, I'm against slavery. Abolition says, and it will not occur on my watch.
Right.
But then the second thing that the spiritual perspective, religious perspective gives us is not only what we are able to say no to, but what we are able to affirm, to say yes to, because we know that in God it has already happened. That's the whole point, that Buddha made it to enlightenment, that the Jews made it to the promised land, that Jesus made it to resurrection. So whether you call it those words or mental health or self-actualization, it's the same thing. And the spiritual and religious perspective allows us to consider it accomplished, to consider it already done, to consider the only issue left to free will is how long it's going to take and how much human suffering and other species suffering will occur before. But that's a power. If we're talking about being spiritual activists, then let's claim the power of that. And that gives us conviction. The Course in Miracles says miracles arise from conviction. That's what terrorists have. They have conviction. More people love on this planet than hate, but unfortunately, those who hate today hate with conviction that I believe needs to be demonstrated in a whole new way by those of us who love. And that takes us full circle back to our conversation, because I think everybody on this call, that's really what we're doing. We're not just speaking a message, because to be honest, a lot of people speak this message at this point. The reason we're all kind of known for it is that we speak it with conviction. And I think by doing so, we inspire others to do the same.
Wow. I think too, there's one other thing, Marianne, and I think that you'll agree with me. I think that the other great power that is given by radical connection with the spirit, by whatever name you call it, is energy. Because as all of us who have for decades now been fighting peacefully for a new world, when you turn up and give yourself completely, you get exhausted, you sometimes feel despair, you get deeply depressed at moments, but if you sustain your practice, you will find that you will be sustained by miraculous love energy. It will come back again and again and again and give you the guts and the courage and the clarity to go forward and to keep going forward. And that's very important at this moment, because what you could call the dark forces are wanting to paralyze and depress the entire human race, to drive them into despair so they can be controlled, and so that the fantasy of the control of the human race by a group of rich and powerful people can be enacted. That's what's behind the scenes. But if you and I connect with the great source of power that is the divine, we will discover in the core of our lives that however difficult the journey is and however painful, through prayer and meditation, we will have access to this energy which will keep flowing in us so long as we turn to it and ask it to keep flowing in us.
Well, God is ever creative. It's always flowing. But it's so interesting in this conversation to me, because Michael and Andrew are a little more mommy and I'm a little more daddy on this. When I think of the despair in our community, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Most Americans, particularly the Americans listening to this call, we don't even know what despair is compared to what billions of people are going through on this planet. And most of the people who are so depressed because it's so hard know in their hearts they have not even been completely politically active, district by district, year by year, season by season. They're kind of new to the process. It didn't work in the last 6 months or a year, and now they're depressed about it. I'm sorry. I don't think we need to be coddling that. And I think cynicism is just an excuse for not helping. So I think most Americans, I'm sorry.
No, I get it. And I'm totally behind you, because so many people come up to me and say what pain they are in. And then I ask them, well, what are you doing? And they look sheepish. You cannot expect to have your despair healed if you're not turning up to actually be part of the solution.
And you exactly. Hope is a moral imperative. And, it's like when these young women ask me, how do I find my power? Or how do I find my voice? You find your voice by using your voice on behalf of someone who doesn't have one. You find your power by using it on behalf of others. And there's too much coddling of that stuff in our community. Despair and depression. Yeah, there's a deep depression, and I certainly talk about that in my book, and it is a global depression. But I also know as a woman, when I think of the women on this planet who, if they, and there are millions of them, who, if they spoke a fraction of the message that I speak, might be killed in the public square. I'm not speaking just for myself. I'm speaking for them as well. And it's amazing what it does. You start forgetting your own problems when you stop thinking about them so much.
So Neale is back here. Neale had a technical challenge there for a moment. So Neale, if you can come in here, I know your wheels are turning here.
Well, I'm at a loss, guys. I'm with three very articulate and wonderful people, and I don't have much to add except what they're saying. I agree with Marianne completely that we need to step up and we need to self-select. And if we're willing to self-select, and that is to choose ourselves to be an exemplar, to be one of those who says, I'm there, I'm here, I'm playing, I'm in the game. I've got skin in the game, and I'm ready. But I think we do have to understand that I hate to sound so predictable, but part of it does still start here. As Marianne said in her earlier remarks, it's a combination of starting here and with our own personal transformation, and then moving forward at this, not one after the other, because we'll never get done with the first. See, I thought for a while that, I shouldn't do anything about the outside world until I finish over here. That's never going to happen, at least not with me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a bad model. Mm-hmm. That's not going to happen. But if I can do it simultaneously, if I can double track it, and if I can allow myself to look at what it means to ask myself, I ask myself 4 questions every morning when I get up, and every evening before I go to bed. These are the 4 questions, what I call the 4 fundamental questions of life. 1, who am I? That is, what is my true identity? 2, where am I? What is this place that I'm in? I don't mean what room am I in or what city am I in. What is this place? What is this environment that I'm in? Number 3, why am I where I am? What is my purpose in being here? And number 4, the most important question, what do I intend to do about that? I ask myself those 4 questions every morning of my life, and it sets the tone, and I want to offer that as another possible tool. It sets the tone for how I move through the day, what I say yes to, what I say no to, what I find time for. And you know what a great miracle for me is? I always have more time than I think I do. I imagine that I don't have enough time, and the fact is I always find the time to do the things that are important.
Thank you, Neale. Inspiring. This whole hour inspiring. Rabbi Michael Lerner, over to you. We've just got a couple of minutes here before I go into a wrap up.
Okay, so I want to say activism is an absolute necessity at this historical moment, but it is a necessary but not sufficient condition for transformation. And yes, we need to bring into that activism not just our minds but our hearts. And to do that, we need to transform our own movements. I recognize that a critical election is coming up in 2018, but the Democratic Party may not win that or even 2020 until they change not just the content of their programs, but the way in which they communicate, which up till now has been a way of putting people down rather than putting people up, of recognizing the value of everyone on the planet, of communicating deep empathy and caring for people with whom we don't agree. And so that's why we at the Network of Spiritual Progressives are doing this training, spiritualprogressives.org/training. Come and be part of it if you're listening to this. Get to be part of the Network of Spiritual Progressives. We have part of the answer, not the whole answer, but the part we have is really important. So come and be part of that. And also, there you'll learn how to communicate empathically and also how to change the dynamics in the liberal and progressive world so that they can be more effective in speaking to people who support some of the most regressive policies on the planet.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Lerner. And Andrew, you've got the last couple minutes. We've got about 120 seconds here.
I couldn't agree with Marianne more. I think that it's time for all of us to realize that we are facing extinction, the potential not just of the collapse of American democracy, but the extinction of the human race. So let's not coddle our despair while recognizing it. Let's not just allow ourselves to be invaded by the shadows of this immense crisis. Let's plunge deep into sacred practice to discover the strength that comes from the Spirit, and let's dedicate ourselves right now to a cause that we truly feel inspired to serve, because everything now is at stake, and everything depends upon you and I claiming our divine identity and going forward with passion and courage and empathy and love and all the skills that Michael is so beautifully celebrating to really do the work of the divine in the world. If we do that, then we can create a new world with God. If we don't, we will die out, and our dying out will take a great deal of nature with it. The times are far more than urgent. They are absolutely decisive.
Thank you, Andrew. And gosh, let me just, again, I'm going to just share this in response to the panel. It's just so amazing, such a privilege to be here with you all. Thank you. Incredibly powerful. If you'd like to receive all of our new podcast episodes, please click on the subscribe button. To find out more about Humanities Team transformational education programs and about how you can help support our mission, please visit us online at humanitiesteam.org, where you can also sign up for our email list so we can let you know about our free online events and other news about what we're up to each week. And again, if you enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review. Thank you.